Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 3 of the SEC Yesterday and Today. I'm your host, Bird LaCroix. And on this week's podcast, we are going to be taking a deep look into the Tennessee and Florida series. We're going to look at this week's game coming up with our guest, and he will also reflect a bit on the past some. But that's what I'm going to do in my segment here, is take a look at a little bit of the history in the series on our yesterday portion of the program. These two teams first met on October 28, 1916. And that began Tennessee's longest winning streak in the series. That was a 10-game winning streak that occurred between the years 1916 and 1953. The longest winning streak Florida has achieved in the series occurred the years 2005 through 2015. The largest margin of victory for Tennessee was a 45-3 win in 1990, and Florida's largest margin of victory was 59-20 in 2007. The Florida Gators claim 3 national championships, while Tennessee claims 4. Florida has won 8 conference championships, and Tennessee has won 16 conference championships. Florida has 3 Heisman Trophy winners, and the Tennessee Volunteers have yet to have a football player that has won the coveted Heisman Trophy. Now, going back to 1916 and the first 10 meetings between the two teams that Tennessee won over that 37-year period, between 1916 and 1953, that was a dominant stretch for the Vols. The Gators didn't pick up their first victory until 1954, and they won that game 14-0. Now, the two teams wouldn't meet after that 1954 game again until 1969 in the Gator Bowl. Florida won that game 14-13. And in an unusual twist, Florida hired away Tennessee's head coach, Doug Dickey, after that game. But a lot of you may not know that Dickey himself was a former Gator quarterback. When you think about this game over the years, Tennessee has had such players on offense like Richmond Flowers, Carl Pickens, and Larry Sievers as receivers, Peyton Manning and Andy Kelly at quarterback, Reggie Cobb and Jamal Lewis at running back. On defense, they've had the Minister of Defense, Reggie White. Also on defense, Leonard Little, Steve DeLong, Jackie Walker, Dale Carter, and most recently, Eric Berry. The Gators on defense, they've had some stalwarts over the years: Jack Youngblood, Wilbur Marshall, Brad Culpepper, Brandon Spikes, and Jarvis Williams. On offense, people like Carlos Alvarez and John Reeves, Wes Chandler, Danny Werfel, Tim Tebow, Eric Rett, Emmett Smith, and John L. Williams. And of course, the most prominent name in Florida football history, possibly, and certainly one of the most prominent names in this series as a player and coach, is the old ball coach, the head ball coach himself, Steve Spurrier. Now, on today's program, we're going to have with us a man who is a huge Tennessee fan, and we first talked on a podcast about 2 or 3 years ago, I believe, our SEC 411 podcast. That's Mike Loveall. And Mike is the managing editor at the Last Word on Sports website, and there's some really good information on there, folks. He also is an author on the site, and he's written some really good pieces. One of the most recent ones relates some football players to Star Wars characters, and you might want to take a look at that in relation to his appearance on our podcast today. His real job, Mike's real job, is Information's Operations Officer for the U.S. Army, and he is currently stationed in San Antonio, Texas. He has a BS from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and once again, a huge Tennessee Volunteer fan. And we would like to welcome to our program today, Mike Loveall. Welcome, Mike, to the SEC Yesterday, and today it is indeed a pleasure to have you with us here.
Bird, thanks for having me. I'm super excited about the SEC Yesterday and Today. I love the history of college football, and I'm super excited for what you're doing here.
Well, excellent, and yeah, I knew that you appreciated that, and it's really a privilege to have you on our third episode. And the first thing I was going to ask you is, we'll do a little bit of yesterday, a little bit more of it, starting with some memories that you might have. Is there anything about the history of the series that you would like to bring out, that it has been impressive to you, that you think people should know, or any particular games that stand out in your memory? If there are, fire away. Have the floor.
Well, when I think of Tennessee, Florida, it's really what I call a new rivalry. It's not one of those Southern rivalries that's steeped in history. I know you gave the stats to the rivalry earlier, but really this is a rivalry that starts in 1992 in the lifetime for most of us. But it's interesting because it's a new rivalry that kind of has some old time roots, and that goes back to Steve Spurrier. He grew up outside of Knoxville. Did not go to Tennessee because they ran the single wing at the time. Went to Florida, won a Heisman there. So you had the East Tennessee kid leaving for Florida and winning his Heisman there. Then you had Doug Dickey back in the days. He played quarterback for Florida, then coached at Tennessee. And then after Tennessee lost to Florida in a bowl game, went and coached for Florida after that in the next season. And then was later Tennessee's athletic director. So you had Steve Spurrier going from Tennessee to Florida. Then you had Doug Dickey going from Florida to Tennessee, back to Florida, back to Tennessee. Interesting. 1984, Florida was stripped of their conference championship, and a lot of the Florida leadership really thought that Tennessee coaches and administration were kind of leading the charge at the SEC to take that away after Charlie Pell got in trouble there at Florida. So it's interesting because it's a new rivalry. Really since 1992, but it's a rivalry that kind of has some foundation back in those early years of the SEC. I think it's also interesting because it's kind of a culture clash in the SEC. When you think Tennessee, you think the mountains, the Smoky Mountains, that kind of single wing offenses. You think General Neyland with his defenses and kind of Philip Fulmer with his pro-style offenses. But when you think Florida, you think the beach, you think sunshine, you think run and gun, you think Spurrier throwing it for Heisman, you think Danny Werfel. You think the passing offenses, the high-powered offenses. So this is kind of a rivalry that kind of has some cultural differences too. It's a little bit different than maybe Alabama, LSU, where that's just a hard nose and both are kind of run-based teams. So I think there's some interesting aspects of this rivalry. But like I said, it's a new rivalry. So most of those big moments I remember. 1990 was really the first big Tennessee-Florida game that I got excited for. I was 12 at that time. That was Spurrier's first game back as coach at Florida, and Tennessee won that game 45-3, which, as you said earlier, is the biggest margin of victory. Hey, Mike, they
beat us down in the swamp that year 48-7, so don't feel bad.
Well, no, Tennessee won 45-3.
That's right. Yeah. That was the biggest margin of victory for Tennessee.
Yeah, that was the biggest margin of victory for Tennessee there in 1990. And I was 12, so I thought
I was thinking 92 for some reason.
Yeah. So I was 12, and I thought I had a lifetime of big victories lined up against Florida. Boy, was I wrong. That was the biggest margin of victory for Tennessee in the 101-year history of the rivalry, 45-3 there in 1990. In 1998, that's the famous John Ward call. Pandemonium reigns as Tennessee wins in overtime. Florida misses a field goal, and John Ward said, "Pandemonium reigns." And of course, if you're a historian of college football, the great voices of the South, John Ward, Eli Gold, Larry Munson at Georgia, and John Ward to me is the voice that I hear in my head most often. That's not me.
Give him 6.
Give him 6. Touchdown, Big Orange. And I know you know this, but I'm in the military and I've spent some time overseas. And every time I would listen to a game overseas or watch it on some computer app in the middle of the desert, I would always hear John Ward's voice, and it just means so much to me to hear his voice. And when I think of that 1998 game, I just think of Pandemonium reigns, his famous call after Florida misses the field goal. So, 1998 was great. Obviously, another step on our way to the national championship. That was a couple games before Clint Stoner had the infamous Stoner stumble. So that was kind of a team of destiny in 98. Florida.
It was. T. Martin.
Yeah, T. Martin. Quarterback in that team. First post-Manning team. So it was kind of a team of destiny. So that kind of plays into that with Florida missing the field goal. Most of our Tennessee memories are not very happy in this rivalry. 2000, Jabbar Gaffney with the catch, and of course you got to apply the air quotes there. The catch that actually wasn't a catch. The linesman that actually made that call was a Vanderbilt graduate, as a matter of fact, never assigned to another Tennessee game after that as long as Phil Fulmer coached. Just an interesting side note to that.
Man.
And then, of course, last year, 11 straight games. Juwan Jennings with that big reception down the sideline. 38 unanswered points for Tennessee. The whole Ducks pulling trucks comments. So last year was fun to finally get off the schneid. So that's kind of my memories from there. A lot of Tennessee fans don't have a lot of good memories from this rivalry. Tennessee fans will tell you that Florida in the 90s it definitely cost us one, if not two, national championships. If you look back, Florida was our only regular season loss in 93, 95, and 97. I'm not sure anybody's beaten that Nebraska team in 97, but boy, I sure would have liked to have a shot. 95, we were a dominant team, and most Tennessee fans will tell you that 95 was a year we should have won the national championship had it not been for the upset to Florida. And then 93, you can make that argument. I think Tennessee lost the bowl game in 93. So Tennessee fans, kind of look back in the 90s, and they hold Florida responsible for costing us almost definitely one, if not two or three national championships in the 90s. 96, 99, 96 and 99 we lost as well, but we're probably not going much further than what we did in those years. But I tell you, 95 is that year that we look back on and really see that as a lost championship season. Yeah,
and Peyton was, a sophomore about that time, wasn't he?
That was his sophomore year. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, Peyton was 94 through 94 through 97. Right.
Yep.
And I hate to bring it up, but Peyton never got a victory over the Florida Gators, did he?
Yeah, and Peyton Manning is beloved in Knoxville and beloved in the state of Tennessee. So the fact that he never got a win against Florida, that's one of the things that pains us as a fan base is that our football favorite son never got that victory against Florida.
That is tough, and one of the games that sticks out to me during Peyton's career was the 96 game, and I was down at my son's trailer in Auburn, and we were preparing to go to see, I think it was Auburn LSU, the night the barn burned down there, and he was a freshman, and we watched the first half of the Tennessee and Florida game, and I think what did you would know, how much did Tennessee get up in that game before Florida made the big comeback?
I believe it was 20. What was the final score? Was 64 to 2?
40 something. I can't remember exactly.
I think Tennessee had 32 at the end. I think we were up maybe 26 to 10. I believe at the half. I'm not for sure, but we had a double-digit lead at the half. And then Florida comes out and it's raining in the second half. This is the rain game, right? The second half rain game. And I think Danny Warfel throws 6 touchdown passes or some football pornographic scene like that, and it was a nightmare. It was probably the biggest one-half nightmare of football in my lifetime of Tennessee football. It was just an absolute nightmare. You know how people have nightmares of clowns after seeing horror movies?
Yeah.
Tennessee fans have nightmares of that second half after watching it on like ESPNU Classic or something like that.
I understand completely because I think every school has those types of things. And, of course, usually they occur for us against Alabama, Auburn against Alabama, or maybe vice versa.
Right.
Well, you think of kick six.
Yeah,
but,
I'm sure Nick Saban still wakes up in the middle of the night with seeing Chris Davis in his head going 40, 30, 20, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And it's nice when you have one or two of those on your side, but like you said, during those times, those years, the mid-90s and Spurrier years, that's hard. But that's part of college football. That's what makes it great. Even when you lose, just being there, remembering those games, and especially if you were there and there were some things that happened, tailgating or family, friends, a lot of stuff like that goes on. And it's just that's one of the things in the pageantry and so forth that it makes college football so great.
It'll certainly toughen you up emotionally.
Whoa, boy, will it ever. And it starts as a child, that first big loss you can remember is, oh no, I thought you mean we can actually lose? And and it's tough. I was also going to ask you about the SEC East a little bit, since that is the Tennessee Vols division. I wanted to ask your thoughts on the East. It looks like another one of those years when it's anybody's game. Somebody like South Carolina or Kentucky or heaven help us, Vanderbilt could even step up and make a lot of noise this year. What are your thoughts on the SEC East race here in this season?
Yeah, I think the SEC East is still a two-tiered division. I think Georgia's at the top. I think Tennessee and Florida are probably 2 and 3, and we'll find out who's 2 and who's 3 after Saturday. And that's traditionally the way the East has been. Of course, South Carolina kind of comes up there, or was up there for a few years when Spurrier was there. But traditionally, the SEC East is a two-tiered division. Georgia, Tennessee, Florida in some order. Right now, I think Georgia's the best team. On paper, they have a great defense. I think they can finish the season as a top defense if they have some luck. 10 of 11 starters back, and then some really good players there. And returning starters is good, but if they're really good starters, and Georgia has 3 or 4 really good players on that defense, I think Georgia's got a chance to be a really good team by the end of the year. If they got 2 good quarterbacks, Fromm gets another game or 2 under his belt, I think he's going to be good. Both of those guys have strong arms, and of course they got two all-world running backs, Sony Michel and Nick Chubb there. So I think Georgia's the team to beat in the East. I think that's pretty clear as I see it. I think Tennessee and Florida, with all the talent and the depth they have, I think they're 2 and 3. And like I said, we'll know a little bit more after this weekend where they stand, who's number 2 and who's number 3. But here's where I think the East is different this year. I think those bottom 4 teams, I think they all have the ability to make upsets. I don't know that they have the depth or the talent across the board to have to make that push into the top 3, but I think they all have the capacity to pull some upsets in the SEC or against non-conference teams. Of course, we'll see Vanderbilt play Kansas State this week. I tell you what, Kyle Shermer against Tennessee last year, and then the last 2 weeks this year, I've never seen a bad quarterback play so well. He's really, he's the last couple weeks, and then against Tennessee. He's putting the ball right. The art of the quarterback is putting the ball where only your receiver can catch it, and he's really grown and matured in his play since the first half of last season. Vanderbilt's got a chance to make a couple upsets. We'll see if they're for real against Kansas State this week. Missouri didn't look good against South Carolina, but with the offense they have, Drew Lock, the gunslinger back there, Demarie Crockett, they got a couple more weapons on offense. If that offense gets going, they can put an upset into anybody because that's a powerful offense they had. We thought their defense was going to be better. Clearly, it hasn't been at the start of the season, but it could get better. South Carolina is better than what I thought they would be. They look good against Missouri. I'm still not sold on South Carolina, but clearly they have the ability to get a win. They had a real good win against North Carolina State, a team that a lot of people thought was going to be a dark horse candidate in the ACC division that they're in. So a good opening weekend win against them, a good win against Missouri. And I believe that win was on the road last week. So clearly South Carolina has the capacity to go on the road in the conference and get a win. And then Kentucky, they've got some talent there. That's a team that could win a game or 2 in the league. So I still think it's a 2-tiered division. Georgia, Tennessee, Florida up top. Kentucky, Missouri, South Carolina, Vanderbilt on the bottom. But I think the bottom 4 are better. I think 2 of those 4 definitely go to the bowl. I think there's probably 3 of those teams that could go to the bowl game. Not sure that all 7 go to the bowl game. But I think all 4 of those teams at the bottom have the ability to beat any of those 3 teams up top on any given Saturday. So I think it's going to be, a close race in the East this year. It's not just going to be decided by the 6 games of Tennessee, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, Florida, Georgia, and Georgia, Tennessee. Those 4 games that traditionally decide the East, I don't think are going to be the thing that decides the East. I think it's going to be whoever can survive those matchups against the 4 bottom guys that are looking to pull the upset.
Yeah, and since we've got you on the program, we are talking about the East, but I've got to ask you, since we reside in the West, I've got to ask you about Alabama. Do you think there's any chance of anybody topping the Alabama apple cart this year?
Yeah, I don't think Alabama is invincible as most other people think. They're still a really good team. Don't get me wrong; they got a lot of talent, but I don't think they're invincible. I still think that if Jared Stidham can get in rhythm, I think Auburn has a chance to win a lot of games this season. I think their offensive line can play better. They had a ton of rushing yards last year. Cameron Petway led the league in rushing. I think their defense has a chance to be great. I think Auburn's a team that could beat a top-ranked team if they just get that offense in order. And you got to think with Gus Malzahn there, it's only a matter of time. Obviously, a lot of frustration there on the Plains with Malzahn and his offense. And I don't know what was going on this week with the thing with Chip Lindsey. So it's
Move it to the press box. I hope. I wish it would make a big difference. I don't know. That seems to be just sort of let's shuffle it a little bit and see if we can come up with something.
I don't know,
but they got to start blocking. The receivers have got to get open, and the line's got to block, and Stidham's got to get release the ball a little more quickly. But they made up. Auburn did that last year. They started off really slowly and then won 6 in a row before Petway and Sean White got hurt.
Right.
And so that's a possibility. I thought it was a probability before the season started, but now the way things have turned out, I don't know so much. And Coach O, LSU down there in Baton Rouge, I'm not sure about that. They're making a little noise right now, but they haven't got into the real meat of their SEC schedule. Or, we live in October, really, particularly in this league. And Tennessee's always made a lot of noise in November, as a matter of fact.
Yep.
But we'll see.
I'm not
I hope it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sold on LSU either. The big question for LSU always is, the quarterback play. Can they get good quarterback play down there?
Exactly.
With Danny Etling, Darius Geis, who's backing him up. I think their defense is a typical LSU defense, but I actually think Auburn has a better chance of beating Alabama than LSU does. Texas A&M, obviously we saw them implode against UCLA and then come out very flat against Nicholls State. And I think the A&M situation is almost at crisis level. I'm not sure Sumlin has the fan. I know he doesn't have the fan base, and I'm not sure he has the locker room for much longer. And so I just from an outsider's perspective, looking at that A&M program, it seems like they're one Jenga peg away from the tower collapsing. That's kind of what it looks like from the outsider's perspective. Ole Miss is Ole Miss. They just got just crushed by these sanctions and the Hugh Freeze thing. Although if you look at Shea Patterson, that guy's just slinging the ball all over the field. I think 400 yards first 2 games and 3 touchdowns. I believe is he the only quarterback in SEC history to start his career with 400 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first 2 games. I think I saw that go across the ticker. And then
he's a major talent, but boy, they got so much trouble in Oxford. It's just hard to see him crawling out of that hole.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I got to see him play in the Army All-American Bowl game here in San Antonio 2 years ago, and he was here. Felipe Franks was here. Tua Tagovailoa was here. I think somebody. Jacob Eason was here. The 4 of those guys were here. I'm sorry, Tua was here the next year, but it was Eason, Franks, and Patterson. And to me, on the field, Patterson looked, just one game, but Patterson looked head and shoulders above Franks and Eason in that high school all-star game. And then I think, I'll tell you what, the surprise to me out of the West is Mississippi State. Fitzgerald has looked better in the air, and of course we all know he's a rushing threat. I think he was top 5 or 6 in the league last year, rushing yards. He was up there at top. So to me, the surprise out of the West is Mississippi State. Is Alabama unbeatable? I don't think so. I think Auburn can beat them. I'm not saying Auburn will beat them, and I think LSU could beat them. I think it's unlikely. But you look around the rest of college football. Obviously, Clemson has a chance. USC looks really good. And as much as it pains me to say it, I think Penn State could provide them some competition as well. And then Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma looks great. I've kind of been on the Baker Mayfield bandwagon since last year. He's just here's what people don't appreciate about Baker is his efficiency. He's such an efficient quarterback. So is Alabama unbeatable? No, I don't think so. Are they still the best in the SEC? Probably. I think it would be hard to make an argument against that. Absolutely.
Yeah, you were, and you mentioned Mississippi State could make some noise. Of course, they've beaten up on a couple of teams in their first 2 games, Charleston Southern and Louisiana Tech. I think they're averaging about 53 a game. But LSU comes to Starkville this week, and we'll make some predictions here in just a second and talk about that. So why don't we get right down to it? You want to make some predictions?
Yeah, sure.
All right, and I'm just going to take it down off of this little grid schedule I got in front of me, so we'll start with Alabama. And Alabama has Mike Bobo and Colorado State coming Tuscaloosa. They had a big win, Colorado State did, over BYU, but then they got throttled in their cross-state rivalry game with Colorado, and now they got to go to Tuscaloosa. What do you think?
Yeah, Mike Bobo is no stranger to the Southeastern Conference. He quarterbacked Georgia there for several years there in Athens. Colorado State's a team on the rise, but Alabama is Alabama. So I think, look at that. Colorado State, like you said, came off that big win against BYU. But I think Alabama wins comfortably, probably probably 24-point margin. That's my guess. It'll be a good test for Bobo and his staff to take that young Colorado State team on the road to a hostile environment, down to the SEC country, and they'll get their they'll learn from that. And that's going to make them a better team, but they're not going to be close to Alabama.
No, they won't be. They are in Alabama's still trying to get Hurts untracked a little bit, I guess, through the air, and they weren't overly impressive against Florida State or Fresno State. But anytime you beat Florida State by 17 points, I mean, good gosh. And then Fresno, they didn't. They kind of piddled around a little bit. But all you got to do is win. That's what matters, and I think they will too. They'll certainly beat the Rams. Now Arkansas has an open date this week, so we move down.
Yeah, Arkansas is going to win that one.
Bye is always a tough one, but I think they'll pull it out. I don't know if we even need to address this. Auburn and Mercer. I see Auburn winning big. What about it?
Yeah, I think Gus Malzahn, I think he's just going to try to throw the ball. He's going to work on his, like you said, the offensive line blocking and getting Stidham in rhythm. I don't think he's worried about the points. I don't think he's worried about how much they score. I don't think he's even worried about how much Mercer scores. He wants to get that blocking set, and he wants to get Stidham and that vertical passing attack going. That's going to be his objective.
Yep. And we'll save the big game, the biggest game in the conference, with your volunteers involved for the last pick. Let's move on down to Georgia and Samford and in Athens. Samford, of course, a FCS school.
Yeah, I think this is typical. Georgia coming off the big out of conference win against Notre Dame. First time they've been north of the Mason-Dixon line in 50 years, since 1968, I believe, sometime in the 60s. So they're going to come back, FCS team. They're still going to be kind of on that high. They're going to sleepwalk through this game, but that's okay. They got plenty of talent. It won't be close. It'll be a lot like Tennessee, Indiana State last week. Georgia wins this comfortably. But I don't think they're going to be scoring 70. Again, this is going to be an opportunity for Fromm to get some more game experience, and that's really what Kirby Smart's going to want to come out of this, with a more experienced quarterback and no injuries. That's his goal coming out of this game.
Yep, I am in agreement on that one. And we stay in the East now with the Kentucky Wildcats going to Columbia, South Carolina, in a pivotal game for these two teams that want to make a move toward that top three you mentioned, that top tier in the division. How do you see Kentucky and South Carolina?
Yeah, big test here. Like you said, South Carolina came off Missouri win last week. Here's what's so hard in the SEC. It's so hard if you're a 5th, 6th place team in a division. It's so hard to get up to that 3rd and 4th place team. I like Kentucky in this game. I think Kentucky surprises South Carolina. I think South Carolina comes off that big win against North Carolina State, goes on the road to Columbia and wins the Battle of Columbia's. Wins that game against Missouri, comes home. I think they might be getting ahead of themselves a little bit. I like Kentucky to come in here. They've been playing underneath the radar, so I like Kentucky to come in here, score some points on that South Carolina defense, and make enough plays on defense to sneak out of Columbia with a win this weekend.
I can see that, but this is where we'll part ways. I've got Kentucky winning 5 out of their first 6 ball game, but I think this is the one that I have them stumbling in, and I think I base that particularly on the case that they're playing in Columbia, South Carolina, and I'm going to stay with that.
Hey, Bird, let me ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
Does that mean you have Kentucky winning next weekend?
Yes, I do. In Lexington. Okay. Yeah.
In Lexington, okay. Yeah,
and now, since Florida has 0 offense again, I can see that happening. I feel better about it this season. I just took the grid, before the season started, and put WL, down to it and added it up, and it was some lopsided stuff. You have some 0-8 teams and some 1-7 teams, but I didn't pick a lot of upsets. But this is one where I thought Kentucky could be a dark horse, but they might not have the depth, and eventually throughout an entire season to win the division, but that they would make some noise.
Right.
And and with Florida, they gave Florida fits the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So
they should have beat them 2 years ago. That delay game didn't get called.
Oh boy, that down in Gainesville. Yeah, that was Lexington.
No, it was 3 years ago. Then 3 years ago.
Yeah. But it was they should have won that game. Well, we move back to the West, and we had the Syracuse Orangemen coming to Baton Rouge. That's interesting, particularly since Middle Tennessee State University beat the Orangemen last week. What's your take?
Yeah, I think LSU wins the game, but I think Syracuse is a program on the rise. Dino Babers up there. He's got he's a potent offensive attack. He's got some weapons on offense. I don't think they have the talent across the board. I don't think they have the speed to get separation against LSU's defensive backs. But just as from afar, I like Dino Babers. I think he's a great coach. I think he's going to get Syracuse back into the ACC discussion, but he's not going to get out of Baton Rouge with a win. I like LSU. I like LSU by about 17 points.
Yep. We're on the same page there as well. Another bye week. The Ole Miss Rebels won't be playing this week. And so we'll move on down to their cross-state rival, Mississippi State. And here we go. A big game. Mississippi State hosting LSU in Starkville. And how do you see that one turning out?
Starkville is a hard place to play. Usually when you go on the road and you go into Jordan Hare, you go into Neyland Stadium, you go into the Swamp. You got a really highly charged crowd. It's 110,000 people. You go into Starkville, it's a little bit different environment. It's a little bit smaller environment. I think Starkville is the second smallest stadium in the SEC behind Vanderbilt. It's not as energetic. You got the cowbells. It's a little bit more. You don't get as much energy from that road crowd in Starkville as you do from going to these big stadiums because of the cowbell. It's a little bit different than the noise and the cheering from other stadiums. So it's a hard place to play on the road. I think the mobile quarterback with Fitzgerald will give LSU fits, but I'm not certain that Fitzgerald's going to be able to do enough passing that it's going to be able to loosen that LSU defense up, to be honest with you. So I like LSU in a game that's probably going to be closer than most people expect. I like LSU by 6.
I hear you. I'm thinking it's going to be a dogfight for maybe the entire game, but I think LSU might pull away and win by double digits in the fourth quarter on that one. And now back to the East, but we got a Big Ten team coming to Columbia, Missouri. Got the Purdue Boilermakers versus the Missouri Tigers. Take it away, Mike.
Yeah, so Purdue's not a very good team, and that's putting it lightly. But I think I think Missouri, like I said earlier, I think Missouri has a tremendous offense. I think they have the foundation there on defense. They just haven't put it together. And if you're looking for a team to get things on track with, Purdue's a great team to have coming into town. So I like Missouri in this one. This is one of those games when you talk about conferences and the strength of conference, you got to look at matchups, like matchups. So you look at Alabama, Florida State, because that's a like matchup. You look at Tennessee, Georgia Tech. Both of those teams are going to be a 4th, 5th, 6th place team in that conference. And to me, where the SEC separates itself is not at the top. Where the SEC separates itself is at the bottom. I think the bottom 4 teams in the SEC are so much stronger than the bottom 25% of the other conferences. This will be one of those things that tests that theory. And I think Missouri handles Purdue pretty easily. I like Missouri to win by a couple touchdowns, and that will go and show that the SEC, while maybe not the best conference, at the top third or the middle third, is still, when you look at the conference overall, is still the toughest conference to play in. So I like Missouri over Purdue here.
I like them as well. On a side note, Seth Marenbloom, our co-host on the SEC 411, picked Purdue to beat his Missouri Tigers in Columbia today.
Really? Really?
Yeah. And I was like, how about that? Well, maybe we need to take Seth's temperature. I'm not.
Seth, like all Missouri Tiger fans, is probably a tormented soul.
He is. God bless him. But, all right. Next ball game. We got the Texas A&M Aggies hosting the University of Louisiana. Louisiana Lafayette comes to College Station. And what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a popular upset pick with Texas A&M just getting their souls crushed in the second half of that UCLA
particularly
game.
after Nichols,
by Josh Rosen. And then they come in and they lay really an egg against Nicholls State at home. So ULL comes in. I think this is going to be a popular upset pick, but I'm going to go the other way. I think those guys have a wake-up call. I think Nicholls State kind of gives them a wake-up call. They can't let that UCLA collapse in the second half get to them. And I think they take care of business against ULL. They've just got too many athletes. They got too many guys on that defense. They got too many athletes on offense. Christian Kirk, just throw the ball to Christian Kirk and give him some space. He's going to score a couple of touchdowns. I mean, this is not that hard.
Get the ball to your playmaker.
Yeah, and they got a good running back there too. Just play the game. Go out there. Don't worry about all the talk and the drama. with the board of regents and the head coach. I think this is a case where some of those seniors in that locker room need to stand up, have a players-only meeting, and just take ownership of that locker room, take ownership of that team, and go out there and just play football. If those guys in that locker room just go out there at Texas A&M and just play football, they're going to be okay. They're going to win 7 or 8 games. They're just that talented. They just have to get things in order. I think they do that this week. And I think they come out and have a pretty decent game against ULL and kind of get things back on track a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I would expect too. And now here's one we could differ on. Here's an interesting ball game in Nashville, Tennessee. The Kansas State Wildcats, under the direction of Bill Snyder, come to Vanderbilt, and Derek Mason's got that defense cranked up. You mentioned Kyle Shermer, and how do you see this one going?
Yeah, this is the one I don't know about. Kansas State's sneaky good. They're like every other Bill Snyder team. They're not flashy. They don't run a media campaign offense where they score 1,000 points against weaker opponents. But they're fundamentally sound. Well coached. Yeah, well coached. Very disciplined on their reads on defense. Very, very disciplined on their execution on offense. But Vanderbilt comes in. That defense looks great. The offense has been looking good. They've been giving Ralph Webb manageable carries. They haven't been running him 25, 28, 32 times a game. Like I said, Kyle Shermer has looked much improved from last year. This is going to be an interesting test right here. I think Kansas State is probably the 4th best team in the Big Ten. I think Vanderbilt's probably the 8th, 9th, 10th best team in the SEC. So it's going to be a very interesting inter-conference matchup. 5 days ago, what day is it today? Wednesday. 5 days ago, I would have picked Kansas State. But right now, if I had to pick, if I was setting the odds, I'd make it even. But if I had to pick, since they're playing in Nashville, I think Vanderbilt gets a big-time interconference win against Kansas State. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be hard fought. But as we sit here right now, I think Vanderbilt gets a close win.
I like it, and I hope it happens, but I am going to go with Kansas State Wildcats in that one. And now we come to the biggest game in the conference this year. We come to the biggest game in the conference this week. Your Tennessee Volunteers versus the Florida Gators down in the swamp. Take it away again, Mike.
Yeah, last year Tennessee ended the 11-game losing streak against Florida. The Ducks pulled the trucks. Jawan Jennings, the hero of last year's games, out with injury. Tennessee's already lost Darren Kirkland Jr., the pivotal playmaker there at middle linebacker on Tennessee's defense. Tennessee lost a ton of talent to the NFL last year. 6 guys drafted. Jalen Hurd transferred to Baylor. 3 of those guys on the defense, Cam Sutton, Jalen Reeves-Maben, and Derek Barnett, 3 big-time playmakers. They also lose Barnett's bookend, Corey Vereen, on the defensive end side. However, Tennessee comes back this year. Big win against Georgia Tech, double overtime in that first game. Walk through. Here's something to look at. This is Tennessee's 3rd game in 13 days. Of course, Florida had the game canceled last week due to the adverse weather. So this is only their 2nd game in 14 days. Will Tennessee be tired or would Florida be rusty? Neither or both. We don't know. We'll have to wait to see. I look at the key to this game. Can Tennessee establish a vertical passing game with Quentin Dormady? Can the offensive line get him time, and can he be accurate on downfield throws to stretch that defense out? If Dormady can establish a vertical passing game and stretch that defensive out, Tennessee will be able to have a little bit of success on the ground with Tyler Bird on the jet sweeps and John Kelly rushing the ball. That's the key. I think Tennessee gets that accomplished. I think their defense holds when it has to. I think Tennessee leaves the swamp with a 2-game winning streak against Florida, 24-17, coming out this weekend.
I like that prediction. And I'm in agreement with you. Even though the ball game is in the swamp, I just don't think here's the bottom line. You got to score more points than the other team. And when it comes down to the final analysis, I just think Tennessee's capable of scoring more points than Florida. They are just dismal on offense once again, it seems. And I'm also going to go with the Tennessee Volunteers. So, Mike, I appreciate you coming out today, and I'm really looking forward to another great weekend of college football. And if you would, tell us where we can find you on social media and so forth.
So I'm the managing editor for lastwordoncollegefootball.com. Come check us out there. I write about Tennessee and SEC sometimes, some national topics as well. And then you can find me on Twitter at MikeLLWOS. At MikeLLWOS. Last Word on Sports. lastwordoncollegefootball.com is part of the Last Word on Sports enterprise. So check me out on Twitter, and then go to lastwordoncollegefootball.com and read some of our articles from all of our writers there. Thanks for having me, Bert. It's always a pleasure to join you. I'm really excited about this SEC Yesterday and Today podcast. Love talking history of college football with guys like you, particularly when it's history of the SEC.
Yes, sir. And, of course, you can find me always on Twitter at Autull, Autull. My personal domain with sports and personal blogs is birdlacroix.com. And you can always find me at sportshacks.com and campuspressbox.com. Okay, folks, we appreciate you listening, and we want you to be sure to take care out there and love your neighbor. We'll see you next week on the SEC Yesterday and Today.